And next up we have The Dungeon Slayer, a LitRPG level of adventure, the Dungeon Slayer series, book number 1, written by Conrad Ryan. This is 370 pages, 99 cents right now. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. Here's the author's description. Mankind has been under attack for 50 years by the awesome power of bosses and monsters who are the denizens of dungeons. Monsters started these attacks when a mystical beast named Raekast appeared and threatened the world, eradicating human life from several continents. Raekast threatened all human life until a mysterious ceremony called Rebirth unlocked the hidden potential of humans strong enough to repel and defeat her. Raekast's final, desperate act caused dungeons to spawn across the globe. The greatest of these dungeons is known as Titan. Dungeons are a threat to humanity and nature alike. Powerful reborn humans known as Slayers enter their dungeon depths to kill the monsters and bosses that live within and retrieve treasure, items, and more. Tad Harrington, a video game loving 16-year-old high school student, was bullied relentlessly throughout his life. Tad's rebirth date has come. His last hope is to reborn a Slayer strong enough to enter the toughest dungeons where a life of power and luxury could await. When things don't go according to plan, Tad finds out he has a special rebirth, one that can level up and grow stronger by defeating monsters. Starting from level 1, how high can Tad climb? Can he overcome the challenges and become the ultimate dungeon slayer? So there you go. This novel was actually a surprise in that I enjoyed it. The beginning portion of it was, to say the least, annoying. It has one of the whiniest openings I think I've ever read. And I mean, I personally, from a writing standpoint, I understand showing like the low place the main character starts off from, so that he has some he can make progress on the story, become a better person, more powerful character, better personality, whatever the case is. But this whiny section in the beginning of the story just kind of went on for such a long time that it just got really annoying, and I was really tempted to just like put down the novel. Thankfully, I pushed past it, and the story really does improve. Once the main character gets to the dungeon diving portion of this novel, everything from there on in is like really entertaining, really good. And there's still a little bit of whining here and there, but that, of course, is just part of the character progression arc of him becoming more powerful, more confident as his skills, strengths, and stats grow. There's some actually very interesting like world building done in the story that to me sort of conflicts with the RPG stuff that the main character uses. In this world, which is described in the novel description, so this isn't like spoilery, there are, I think there's a technical term in the novel, but it's like essentially dungeon monsters and dungeon monsterish ghosts that are threatening like the atmosphere and the weather from the world, like blocking out the sun, making it super cold. And these kind of spirits are released. There are also additionally monsters that actually spawn from dungeons threatening human lives. And so people have discovered a way to tap into their potential through a rebirth process. And the main character goes through this process only to discover that he has a power level of 0, which becomes, which is less than even a normal person, a citizen. And that changes as he gets the RPG interface, but there was an inherent conflict, at least for me, when I was reading this, between the system that's described for everybody else and the system that is described for the main character. It's this really weird conflict of like powers. Like the main character gets a bunch of stuff that's very RPG described, classes, skills, stats, and all that great stuff. But it's just really oddly applied between like the larger system where people describe in terms of just like a power number, and their powers are just like never really described in those terms. So it's just like a small little detail that just like took a little bit away from me. Other than that though, the story really was quite good. From essentially the first time the main character goes dungeon diving, there's lots of good action. There's the main character who fights in a dungeon with the group, he grows into his powers, develops characters, he unlocks the mysteries of his abilities and why he is the way he is. And the end had like this really like enjoyable dark turn that I wasn't expecting. So like I said, the novel has a slightly rocky start, which is pretty fine. I believe, speaking to the author's representatives will say that this is his first novel, which is totally understandable, but like I said, it's very well written for being such, and it has some very nice pacing. The RPG stuff shows about the 7% mark of the novel when the main character gets his power rating of 0, but also gets access to this RPG interface that allows him to develop his stats, grow powers, gets a bunch of abilities that are again very RPG related. But oddly enough, he doesn't always recognize him, though he's a gamer. However, again, this is again one of those aspects where the game mechanics I have an issue with them, just because his powers they feel rather wand-wavy, and they're slightly inconsistent in their development, and that the main character. I'll give you an example. Essentially, the main character at the beginning of the novel, when he starts to do dungeon dive, he uses tools for healing and for spellcasting, like a healer's crook and a mage's wand. And the minute he touches them, he gets magical spells and gets magical abilities for those tools. However, that's not applied when he's using a warrior sword or some other piece of equipment. And again, those particular tools being used for a class as a restricted class item don't really match up again with the previous world building that was done, that somebody just gets a power rating and they're classified in this particular category, and they're allowed to dive in dungeons or clear the skies from monsters as a creator, whatever the case is. There's really no world building done that justifies anybody really having class specific abilities, because they don't have classes. That's something that's very much a part of the main character's RPG interface and the way he's defining his power system. So again, just small conflicts. And again, it's a minor thing for somebody who really loves game mechanics like I do. Other than those small issues, though, so the story was still very entertaining. Even the main character who does get his powers in kind of a wand wavy way, where he's not really earning them, they're just kind of showing up. The powers are still well used in fights. So they create some variation of powers, and he does use them intelligently to maximize their benefits and combining them in interesting ways. And they create tension, and other aspects of the game mechanics really are well fleshed out and described. A majority of the power progression comes from his increasing his stats as he levels, and those stats have actual real impact on the story and the main character's physical descriptions and how he fights. Increasing his strength or his dexterity have real physically described consequences, and I like the fact that they have an impact in that respect. That aspect of the game mechanics is again done well, and it applies very well in the story. Overall, this is a very good action-filled story, and there are a couple things that drop my level of enjoyment, because I love game mechanics, and my brain has an issue when they don't make sense, or there's conflicting kind of concepts there. But again, that's really neat. Even with those issues and some of the wand waving moments, it's still a good dungeon diving story. And again, the darker aspects of the story world that develop towards the end of the story were really quite entertaining and unexpected. So for me, it's a score of 7.6 out of 10. Again, once you get to that dungeon diving portion of the story, the fighting and the character progression are very entertaining. And it gets a score of 7.6 out of 10 for the Dungeon Slayer, a LitRPG level up adventure, the Dungeon Slayer series, book number 1.